Welcome to the dark side of YouTube, where secrets and mysteries are just a click away. If you want to hear real life stories from real experiences, you're in the right place. Feel free to subscribe and don't forget to write a comment telling your opinion on the stories. The Red Room host knows my name and my life is in danger. I never thought I'd be the type to get involved with the dark web. I mean, I always heard stories about the seedy underbelly of the internet, but it was one of those things you just shrug off and think, that won't happen to me. Well, it did happen to me, and now I'm writing this because my life is in serious danger. It all started a few weeks ago. I was bored one night, mindlessly scrolling through the usual social media crap. I ended up on Reddit, like I usually do, and somehow got sucked into a thread about the dark web. You know, the usual urban legends and spooky stories. I should have just stopped there, but curiosity got the best of me. I followed a link to some sketchy forum discussing the dark web. People there talked about red rooms, live streams where viewers could pay to see unspeakable horrors, things too gruesome to describe in detail. It sounded like utter bullshit to me at first. I mean, who would actually watch that, right? But the comments were so detailed, so specific, I couldn't help but get intrigued. One user, let's call him Shadow King 666, posted a detailed guide on how to access a red room. He claimed it was real and even provided a series of steps to get there. It involved downloading Tor, setting up a VPN, and navigating through a series of onion links. Against my better judgment, I followed his instructions. I figured I'd just poke around and see if this stuff was real. After hours of navigating through encrypted sites, I finally found a link that looked promising. Red Room 12 QZ. Onion. My heart pounded as I clicked on it. The page loaded slowly, revealing a black screen with red text. It read, "Enter the room." Beneath it was a box to input a password. I had no idea what to do, but Shadow King 666 mentioned a password in his post. Lucifer 1999. I typed it in, and the screen went black for a moment before a live feed appeared. The room was dimly lit, with a single metal chair in the middle. It looked like some kind of abandoned warehouse. The chat on the side of the screen was buzzing with excitement, messages flying by so fast I could barely read them. People were posting requests, bidding on what they wanted to see happen next. It was sickening. Then the host appeared. He was wearing a black mask and a hoodie, his voice distorted. He greeted the viewers and started reading out usernames, thanking them for their contributions. The whole thing felt surreal. That's when things took a turn for the worse. He looked directly into the camera and said, "Welcome, Dark Watcher 87. Glad you could join us." Dark Watcher 87 was my username. My blood ran cold. How did he know? I had used a VPN. I was sure my connection was secure. But it didn't end there. He started rattling off details about me. My name, my address, even the color of the shirt I was wearing. I panicked and closed my laptop, my heart racing. This was supposed to be anonymous, just a sick internet prank, right? I thought I could just forget about it. But the next morning, I found an envelope on my doorstep. No postage, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message typed in red ink. "We are watching you, Mike." I nearly threw up. How did they know where I lived? I went to the police, but they didn't take me seriously. They said it was probably a prank, and told me to stay off those kinds of websites. Easy for them to say. For the next few days, I felt like I was being watched everywhere I went. I started noticing strange cars parked near my house, unfamiliar faces in the neighborhood. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong. A week later, things escalated. I received another envelope, this time with photos. They were pictures of me, taken from outside my house, at work, even when I went grocery shopping. The angles suggested they were taken by multiple people, different locations, different times. Some of the photos showed me sleeping, taken through my bedroom window. The accompanying note simply said, "Your time is running out." I decided to move. I packed up my stuff and stayed with a friend across town. For a few days, things were quiet. I started to relax, thinking maybe I had managed to shake them off. But then, the emails started coming. Each one was more disturbing than the last. Videos of other Red Room victims begging for their lives, being subjected to unspeakable torture. The final email contained a video file. It showed my new address and ended with the message, "You can't hide." Now, I'm living in constant fear. I don't know who these people are or what they want from me. I can't go to the police. They'll just think I'm crazy. I'm writing this as a warning. Stay away from the dark web, especially Red Rooms. It's not worth the curiosity. If anyone has any advice on what to do, I'm all ears. I'm scared, and I don't know how much longer I can keep running. It has been a few days since my last post, and things have only gotten worse. I'm on edge all the time, jumping at every sound, every shadow. I barely sleep, and when I do, it's only for a few hours at a time. The nightmares are relentless. I keep seeing the host's masked face, hearing his distorted voice calling my name. I wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, convinced that he's in the room with me. Yesterday, I decided to buy some surveillance equipment. I needed to know if they were still watching me, if they were still outside my window. I set up cameras around the house, covering all the entrances and any possible points of entry. The first night, I sat in front of my laptop, watching the live feeds. Nothing happened. The second night was the same. I started to think maybe they had finally given up. Then last night, I saw him. At around 3 a.m., the motion detector went off. I switched to the camera feed from my front door, and there he was, the host. He was standing just outside the reach of the porch light, his mask reflecting the dim glow. He stared directly at the camera for what felt like an eternity. Then he lifted a hand and waved, slowly, deliberately. I froze, unable to move or think. After a few moments, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I called the police again, but they arrived too late. There was no trace of him. They didn't find any footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. They suggested I might be suffering from stress-induced hallucinations. Maybe I was, but the footage was real. I showed it to them, but they just dismissed it as a prank, some elaborate hoax. This morning, I woke up to find a USB drive on my doorstep. No note this time, just the drive. I didn't want to plug it in, but curiosity got the best of me. I connected it to my laptop, and there was a single video file. I clicked on it, and the screen went black for a moment before the video started playing. It was a live feed of my bedroom from the night before. The angle was from the corner of the ceiling, capturing me tossing and turning in my sleep. The video zoomed in on my face, and for a moment, everything was still. Then the door to my bedroom creaked open, and the host stepped inside. He walked slowly to the side of my bed, standing over me, watching me sleep. My skin crawled as I saw myself completely oblivious to his presence. He leaned down, so close I could almost feel his breath on my neck, and whispered something inaudible. After a few moments, he straightened up and left the room, closing the door silently behind him. I slammed my laptop shut, heart racing. They had been inside my house. They had been in my bedroom, watching me while I slept. I felt violated, exposed. I tore apart my room, looking for any hidden cameras, any sign of how they had managed to get in. I found nothing. I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed, but it didn't make me feel any safer. They had gotten in before. They could do it again. In my panic, I reached out to Shadow King 666 on the dark web forum. I told him everything that had happened, begged for his help. He replied almost immediately, but his response was cryptic. "You opened the door. Now you must close it." I had no idea what he meant, and when I pressed him for more information, he went silent. Desperate, I decided to reach out to some of the other users on the forum. Most of them ignored me, but one user, Silent Watcher, claimed to know what was happening. They said that once you enter a red room, you become a part of it. The viewers, the host, they all thrive on the fear and suffering of those who stumble into their world. They told me the only way to escape was to confront the host directly, to go back to the red room and face him. I didn't want to believe it. The idea of going back terrified me, but I was out of options. I needed this to end. I needed my life back. So I set up my laptop again, reconnected to the dark web, and found the red room link. My hands were shaking as I typed in the password, Lucifer, 1999. The screen went black, and the live feed appeared. The same dimly lit room, the same metal chair. The chat was already buzzing, but this time, the messages were different. They were all talking about me. "He's back. The coward returns. Let's see some real fear." My stomach churned as I read the comments, but I forced myself to stay focused. The host appeared, wearing the same black mask and hoodie. "Welcome back, Dark Watcher 87, he said, his voice dripping with malice. "We've been expecting you." He gestured to the chair, and the camera angle changed, revealing a figure tied to it. It was me. Or rather, it looked like me. The figure was dressed in my clothes, wearing a mask of my own face. It was disturbingly lifelike, every detail perfectly replicated. The host walked over to the figure and pulled out a knife. "Let's see if you can handle the truth," he said, plunging the knife into the figure's chest. Blood poured out, soaking the clothes, the mask. The figure screamed, a sound so real it made my blood run cold. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. "Every time you watch, every time you engage, you give us power," the host continued, his voice growing darker. "You can't escape us. We are everywhere, and we are always watching." He looked directly into the camera, directly at me. "And we will never stop." The screen went black, and I sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just a game or a prank. This was real. They were real, and they had no intention of letting me go. Now, I'm sitting here, typing this out, hoping someone, anyone, can help. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. They're always watching, always waiting. If you're reading this, please, stay away from the dark web. Don't make the same mistake I did. Once you're in, there's no way out. I didn't sleep at all last night. How could I? I kept replaying the video in my head, the host's words echoing over and over. We are everywhere, and we are always watching. My rational mind kept trying to convince me it was some elaborate hoax, but deep down I knew the truth. They were real, and they were coming for me. This morning, I decided to take a different approach. I needed to find out who was behind this, who the host was, and why they had targeted me. I started digging through every piece of information I could find on the dark web, looking for anything that could give me a lead. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack, but I had to try. Hours passed, and I found myself on a forum dedicated to dark web mysteries and conspiracies. Most of it was the usual nonsense, but one thread caught my eye. It was about a group known as the Watchers. According to the thread, the Watchers were a secretive organization that thrived on fear and chaos. They were rumored to run the most notorious red rooms, using their influence to target and torment anyone who stumbled upon their streams. One post stood out in particular. It was from a user named Observer1, who claimed to have once been a member of the Watchers. He described in detail how they operated, how they chose their victims, and most importantly, how they kept their anonymity. Observer 1 claimed that the Watchers had eyes everywhere, infiltrating everyday life through hidden cameras and compromised technology. They could track anyone, anywhere, anytime. Desperate, I sent a private message to Observer 1, explaining my situation and begging for help. Hours went by without a response, and I started to lose hope. But then, a message notification popped up. It was from Observer 1. I know what you're going through, the message read. I can help you, but it's not going to be easy. Meet me at the old warehouse on Elm Street tonight at midnight. Come alone. My heart raced as I read the message. It felt like a trap, but I had no other choice. I had to take the risk if I wanted any chance of escaping this nightmare. I spent the rest of the day preparing, making sure my phone was fully charged, and packing a small bag with essentials. As night fell, I left a note for my friend explaining where I was going and why. I hoped it wouldn't come to that, but I needed someone to know in case things went wrong. At 11:30 p.m., I left the house and made my way to the warehouse. The streets were eerily quiet, every shadow and movement making me jump. By the time I reached Elm Street, my nerves were frayed and my body was on high alert. The warehouse was an old, decrepit building that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling off the walls. I took a deep breath and approached the entrance, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. Inside, the air was musty and cold. I made my way through the maze of abandoned machinery and rusted equipment, following the faint sound of footsteps. Eventually, I reached a large open space, and there he was, Observer 1. He was a tall, thin man, his face partially hidden by a hood. He looked up as I entered, and I could see the glint of something metallic in his hand. "You're brave to come here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Most people wouldn't have taken the risk." "I didn't have a choice," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to know how to stop them." Observer 1 nodded and gestured for me to sit on a nearby crate. "The Watchers are powerful, but they're not invincible. They rely on fear and intimidation to control their victims. The first step to breaking free is to take away their power. You need to stop being afraid." Easier said than done, I thought, but I listened as he explained more about the Watchers. According to Observer 1, they used a network of informants and hackers to gather information on their targets. They exploited every vulnerability, from social media profiles to unsecured devices. Once they had enough data, they would use it to manipulate and terrorize their victims, pushing them to the brink of insanity. The only way to fight back is to take away their access, Observer 1 said. You need to go off the grid completely. No phones, no internet, nothing that can be traced. You also need to confront the host, make him reveal himself. It's risky, but it's the only way to break their hold on you. My mind raced as I processed his words. Going off the grid seemed impossible, but confronting the host, that was a death sentence. How am I supposed to do that? I asked, my voice trembling. You'll need to find their main hub, Observer 1 replied. It's a heavily guarded secret, but there are ways to find it. Look for patterns in their broadcasts, clues hidden in the background. They're arrogant, and they leave breadcrumbs if you know where to look. Before I could ask more, we heard a noise from the entrance. Observer 1's eyes widened in fear. They found us, he whispered. You need to go, now. I stood up, panic setting in. What about you? I'll hold them off, he said, pulling out a small handgun. You have a chance. Don't waste it. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, weaving through the darkened corridors of the warehouse. Behind me, I heard the sound of gunfire and shouting, but I didn't look back. I burst out into the night, my lungs burning, and kept running until I reached a safe distance. Now, I'm hiding out in a motel, trying to make sense of everything. I don't know if Observer 1 survived, but his words are etched into my mind. I need to go off the grid, find their hub, and confront the host. It sounds impossible, but it's the only way. If anyone out there has any advice or resources that can help, please, I'm begging you. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. It's been 2 days since I fled the warehouse, and every minute feels like an eternity. Observer 1's instructions are clear in my mind, but executing them seems nearly impossible. I've moved 3 times since then, never staying in one place for more than a few hours. Each move is a gamble, but I can't afford to stay still. They're always a step behind me, and I feel their eyes everywhere. Last night, I found a rundown cabin in the woods. No electricity, no running water, just isolation. It's not comfortable, but it's safe, at least for now. I spent hours reviewing the video footage of the red rooms, looking for any patterns, any clues Observer 1 mentioned. The host is meticulous, but there are subtle details, symbols, numbers, and even the way the light flickers that might be breadcrumbs. I don't know if it's paranoia or if I'm actually onto something, but I have to try. I noticed a recurring symbol in the background of several streams, a distorted version of an infinity loop, almost like a twisted Mobius strip. It appeared in different forms, spray painted on walls, etched into tables, even drawn in blood. It had to mean something. I cross-referenced it with various dark web forums and found a mention of it linked to an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. The place was notorious for its dark history, and local legends claimed it was haunted. It sounded like a perfect hideout for the Watchers. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a pocket knife, I made my way to the asylum. The building loomed in the darkness, a hulking mass of decay and despair. Its windows were shattered, and the entrance was covered in graffiti. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of mold and rot. Every step I took echoed through the empty halls, making me jump at every sound. I followed the twisted Mobius strip symbol, finding it carved into walls and doors, leading me deeper into the asylum. As I moved through the corridors, I felt like I was being watched, but I couldn't turn back now. I finally reached a heavy metal door with the symbol prominently displayed. My heart pounded as I pushed it open, revealing a large room filled with old medical equipment and rusted bed frames. In the center of the room was a makeshift broadcasting setup. Cameras, monitors, and wires everywhere. This was it. The hub. As I approached the setup, the monitors flickered to life, showing the host in his black mask and hoodie. "Welcome, Dark Watcher 87. His voice distorted but recognizable. "I knew you'd find us, eventually." I gripped the knife tighter, my hands shaking. "I'm done running," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want this to end." The host laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the room. "You think you can stop us? You're just a pawn in a much larger game. But since you're here, why don't we give the viewers a special treat?" Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered, and I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to see two figures in black masks advancing toward me. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to confront the host, had to make him reveal himself. "Why me?" I shouted, trying to stall for time. "Why did you target me?" The host's voice crackled through the speakers. "You were curious, and curiosity is dangerous. You stepped into our world, and now you're part of it. There's no escape." The masked figures lunged at me, and I fought back with everything I had. The first one grabbed me, but I managed to slash his arm with the knife. He let out a grunt of pain and stumbled back. The second one tackled me to the ground, and we struggled, rolling across the floor. I could hear the host's distorted laughter in the background mocking me. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to free myself and scrambled to my feet. I lunged at the broadcasting setup, slashing at the wires and smashing the monitors. Sparks flew, and the room plunged into darkness. The host's laughter turned into a roar of anger. "You think this will stop us?" he shouted. "We are everywhere." In the dim light, I saw the two masked figures recovering, ready to attack again. Desperation took over, and I swung the knife wildly, managing to fend them off long enough to make a run for the door. I sprinted through the dark corridors of the asylum, my breath ragged, my heart pounding. I burst out into the cold night air, not daring to look back. I ran and ran, not stopping until I reached the edge of the woods. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. The asylum was far behind me, but the terror lingered. They might be everywhere, but I had taken a stand. I had fought back. I'm writing this now from a hidden location, using a borrowed laptop with no connection to my real identity. I don't know if I'll ever truly be free from the Watchers, but I won't let them control me with fear anymore. If you're reading this, heed my warning. Curiosity can be deadly. Stay away from the dark web and its horrors. Once you're in, it's almost impossible to get out. But if you do find yourself trapped, remember this: you can fight back. Don't let them win. My friend is the host of a Red Room. I just found out I am his next victim, so I don't really know where to start with this. I guess I just need to get it all out, and maybe someone out there can help me figure out what to do next. It all started a few weeks ago, but I need to give you some background first. My name is Alex, and I've known my friend Dave since high school. We were pretty close, did everything together, We even went to the same college. We both graduated a couple of years ago and got decent jobs. We didn't hang out as much after that, but we still kept in touch, grabbing beers now and then, that sort of thing. Dave was always a bit of a tech nerd, but I never thought much of it. I mean, he'd always been into coding and stuff. Even built his own PC. He would sometimes talk about the deep web and the dark web, but I always thought he was just messing around, trying to sound cool. I didn't really believe half of the stuff he said. One night Dave invited me over to his place, said he had something to show me. I was curious and a bit bored, so I agreed. When I got there, he seemed different. I can't really explain it, but there was this strange vibe. He was too excited, jittery even. He had this grin on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. He led me to his basement, which was weirdly clean and organized compared to the rest of his house. There was this big computer setup down there, multiple monitors, all sorts of gadgets and cables. I joked about him being a mad scientist or something, but he just gave me this creepy smile. He told me to sit down and started talking about this project he'd been working on. He said he'd gotten deep into the dark web and found something really interesting. At first, I thought he was going to show me some hacker stuff, maybe some illegal downloads or whatever, but then he pulled up this website. It was a simple page, black background, red text. The title at the top said The Red Room. I'd heard of red rooms before, you know, urban legends about live stream torture and murder. I always thought it was just a myth, but what I saw on the screen made my stomach drop. The page had a live chat on the side and a video feed in the center. The feed was dark at first, but then it flickered on, showing a room with a single chair in the middle. The chair had restraints on the arms and legs. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Dave started explaining how he'd managed to hack into this site, how he could watch without being detected. He sounded almost proud, like he was showing off some new toy. I was horrified, but I couldn't look away. The chat was full of people, typing the most disgusting, vile things. They were excited, waiting for the show to start. I told Dave we should call the police, but he just laughed. He said the police couldn't do anything, that this was beyond their reach. I was getting really freaked out and told him I wanted to leave, but he insisted I stay, said I needed to see this. Then the video feed changed. The camera zoomed in on the chair, and a door opened in the background. Two men dragged a blindfolded, gagged person into the room and strapped them to the chair. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to watch, but I felt like I had no choice. The person in the chair started struggling, but they were tied down too tight. The men left the room, and the chat went wild. People were betting on how long it would take, what kind of torture would be used. It was sickening. And then it started. A figure in a mask entered the room, carrying a toolbox. He opened it and pulled out various instruments, knives, pliers, things I didn't even recognize. The first cut made the person in the chair scream, a muffled, desperate sound that will haunt me forever. I couldn't take it anymore. I yelled at Dave, told him this was insane, that we needed to stop it, but he just looked at me with that eerie smile and said, "You haven't seen the best part yet." That's when it hit me. Dave wasn't just watching this. He was involved. He was part of this sick, twisted world. I felt a wave of nausea and bolted for the stairs. Dave tried to stop me, but I shoved past him and ran out of his house. I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to process what I'd seen. I didn't answer Dave's calls or texts. I couldn't face him. But then, a few nights later, I got an anonymous email. It was a video file. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The video showed Dave's basement, the same setup, the same monitors, but this time, the chair wasn't empty. There was someone tied to it, blindfolded and gagged. As the camera zoomed in, I felt my blood run cold. The person in the chair was me. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. I'm scared, and I have no one to turn to. Dave has been my friend for years, but now I realize I never really knew him. I don't know what he's planning, but I have this horrible feeling that I'm next. If anyone has any advice, please help me. I don't want to end up as the next victim in that hellish room. I didn't sleep at all after watching that video. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that basement, that chair, and my own terrified face staring back at me. I kept thinking about Dave, about the sick grin he wore when he showed me the red room. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The first thing I did was call in sick to work. I couldn't face anyone. I couldn't pretend everything was normal when my entire world was falling apart. I spent the day locked in my apartment, curtains drawn, jumping at every little sound. I tried to tell myself that the video was some kind of sick prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I needed to do something. I needed to find out what the hell was going on. So, I started digging. I spent hours on my computer, searching for any information about the Red Room, about dark web operations, about anything that could help me understand what Dave was involved in. I found a lot of horror stories, urban legends, and a few news reports, but nothing concrete. It all seemed so far removed from my reality, yet here I was, living in a nightmare. I decided to reach out to an old friend from college, Mark. He was a bit of a conspiracy nut, always talking about secret societies and government cover-ups. I figured if anyone could help me navigate this dark web stuff, it would be him. I called him up, and after some awkward small talk, I told him everything about Dave, the basement, the Red Room, the video. Mark listened quietly, and when I was done, he didn't laugh or call me crazy. Instead, he told me to come over to his place immediately. I was hesitant, but I didn't know what else to do. So I grabbed my car keys and drove to Mark's apartment on the other side of town. When I got there, Mark was waiting for me at the door. He ushered me in quickly, locking the door behind us. His place was a mess as usual, but I barely noticed. He led me to his computer room, which was filled with monitors, hard drives, and all sorts of tech gadgets. Mark was serious, more serious than I'd ever seen him. We sat down, and I showed him the video. He watched it intently, not saying a word. When it ended, he turned to me with a grim look on his face. "This is bad, Alex. Really bad," he said. He started typing furiously on his keyboard, pulling up various dark web forums and chat rooms. Mark explained that red rooms were real, though incredibly hard to find. They operated in the darkest corners of the web, protected by layers of encryption and anonymity. He said that if Dave was involved, he was in deep, and getting out wouldn't be easy. I asked him what we should do, but he just shook his head. "You need to disappear for a while," he said. "Dave knows where you live, and if he's serious about this, you're not safe here." The idea of running away didn't sit well with me, but I knew he was right. We made a plan. I would go to a motel on the outskirts of town and lay low for a few days while Mark did some digging. He promised to find out as much as he could about Dave and the Red Room. I packed a small bag and left, feeling more paranoid than ever. The motel was a dingy, rundown place that reeked of mildew and cigarette smoke. But it was cheap and, more importantly, off the grid. I checked in under a fake name, paid in cash, and holed up in my room. The first night was the worst. Every creak, every footstep outside sent my heart racing. I barely slept, jumping at every noise. The next day, I called Mark to check in. He sounded tired, like he hadn't slept either. He told me he'd found some information, but it wasn't good. Apparently, Dave was known in certain circles as the host. He was one of the people running the Red Room, organizing the streams, and even participating in the torture. Mark said Dave had been doing this for years, right under my nose. The more Mark talked, the more I realized how little I knew about my so-called friend. Dave had always been secretive, but I'd chalked it up to him being a private person. Now, I understood that he was hiding something far more sinister. Mark also found out that the Red Room wasn't just some random torture show. It was a well-organized operation with a network of viewers and participants. People paid big money to watch, and even more to take part. It made me sick to think about it, but I needed to know what I was up against. As Mark continued digging, I tried to keep a low profile, but it was hard. Every time I heard a car pull into the motel parking lot, I tensed up, expecting Dave to burst through the door. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, I'd have to confront him. I just didn't know how. A few days later, Mark called me with an urgent tone in his voice. "Alex, you need to get out of there now," he said. "Dave's been looking for you. He's posted your picture on some forums, offering a reward for information on your whereabouts." My blood ran cold. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the motel, not even bothering to check out. I jumped into my car and started driving, not knowing where to go. I called Mark again, and he told me to come back to his place. He had a plan, but it was risky. When I arrived, Mark was waiting for me with a duffel bag packed with supplies. He told me we needed to get off the grid completely. We drove to a remote cabin his family owned in the mountains. It was old, isolated, and had no internet or cell service. The perfect place to hide. We drove for hours, hardly speaking. The further we got from civilization, the more uneasy I felt, but I knew it was the only way. When we finally reached the cabin, it was nearly dark. The place was run down, but it was safe, at least for now. As we settled in, Mark laid out his plan. We'd stay here for a while, keep our heads down, and try to figure out a way to expose Dave and the Red Room. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. We spent the next few days preparing, gathering supplies, and trying to come up with a strategy. But despite our best efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I started hearing noises at night, footsteps outside the cabin, whispers in the dark. Mark told me it was just my imagination, but I wasn't so sure. Then one night, everything changed. I woke up to the sound of glass breaking. I jumped out of bed and ran to the living room, where I found Mark lying on the floor, blood pooling around him. He'd been shot. Before I could react, I felt a sharp pain in my side, and everything went black. When I came to, I was in a dark room, tied to a chair. My head was pounding, and I felt a trickle of blood running down my face. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized where I was. Dave's basement. The same setup, the same monitors, and Dave was standing in front of me, grinning like a maniac. "Welcome to the show, Alex," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." My heart was racing, and I felt a surge of panic. I struggled against the restraints, but it was no use. Dave just laughed and picked up a camera, pointing it at me. "Smile for the audience," he said. "It's time for the main event." As the camera started rolling, I knew I was in deep trouble, and I had no idea how to get out. I've seen a lot of messed up things in my life, but nothing prepared me for the terror I felt in that moment. My mind was racing, adrenaline pumping, but I was completely helpless. Dave's grin stretched wider as he stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with sadistic glee. "Do you like my setup?" he asked, gesturing to the monitors behind him. "I've been working on it for years, perfecting it, and now you get to be the star of my next show." He moved to one of the monitors and started typing. The screens flickered to life, displaying the familiar black background with red text. The chat was already buzzing, viewers eagerly anticipating the spectacle. My stomach churned at the thought of those sick bastards watching, waiting for my suffering. "Please, Dave," I begged, my voice shaky. "You don't have to do this. We've been friends for so long. Just let me go. I won't tell anyone, I swear." His laughter echoed in the room, cold and mocking. "Oh, Alex, you still don't get it, do you? This is what I do. This is who I am. And now, you're a part of it." He walked over to a table covered in various tools and picked up a large serrated knife. The blade glinted menacingly in the dim light. My heart pounded in my chest as he approached, the knife in his hand. "Let's get started, shall we?" he said, his voice dripping with anticipation. The first cut was shallow, but the pain was immediate and intense. I screamed, the sound muffled by the gag in my mouth. The chat exploded with comments, cheering and jeering, urging Dave to do more. He obliged, making another cut, deeper this time. The agony was unbearable, and I could feel the warm blood trickling down my arm. Dave moved methodically, slicing and cutting, each wound more excruciating than the last. I lost track of time, my world reduced to a blur of pain and fear. The room spun around me, the monitors a distorted mess of text and images. Then suddenly, the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, I thought I was dead. But then I heard footsteps, hurried and frantic. There were shouts, the sound of a struggle, and then silence. The lights flickered back on, and I saw Mark standing there, bloodied but alive. He held a gun pointed at Dave, who was on the floor, clutching his side where blood seeped through his fingers. "Mark," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of dread. I knew this wasn't over. "Hang on, Alex," Mark said, his voice strained. "I'm going to get you out of here." He moved quickly, cutting through my restraints with a knife he'd grabbed from the table. As soon as I was free, I collapsed into his arms, my body weak and trembling. He helped me to my feet, and we started towards the stairs. But Dave wasn't done yet. With a guttural snarl, he lunged at us, the knife still clutched in his hand. Mark fired the gun, the sound deafening in the small room. Dave fell back, a look of shock on his face. He lay there, motionless, blood pooling around him. "Come on, we need to go," Mark urged, pulling me towards the stairs. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to move. leaning heavily on Mark for support. We stumbled up the stairs and out of the house, into the cold night air. Mark helped me into his car, and we sped away, the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror. We drove in silence for a while, the events of the night weighing heavily on us. My mind was a mess, replaying everything that had happened. The pain from my wounds was intense, but the adrenaline kept me going. "We need to get you to a hospital," Mark said finally, his voice filled with concern. "You're losing a lot of blood." I nodded weakly, unable to muster the energy to speak. I knew he was right. I was fading fast. We pulled up to a small rural hospital, and Mark helped me inside. The staff took one look at me and sprang into action, whisking me away to the emergency room. I lost consciousness soon after, the world fading to black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, hooked up to various machines. Mark was sitting by my side, looking exhausted but relieved. "You're okay," he said softly when he saw me open my eyes. "You're safe now." I wanted to believe him, but a part of me knew that the nightmare wasn't truly over. Dave might be dead, but the Red Room was still out there, and so were the people who ran it. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. My life would never be the same. The days following my escape were a blur of hospital rooms, police interviews, and restless nights. Mark stayed by my side through it all, a constant, reassuring presence in the chaos that had become my life. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. The pain from my wounds was constant, a grim reminder of the horrors I'd endured. The police took our statements and launched an investigation into Dave and the Red Room. They seized his computer equipment and combed through his house, searching for evidence. I told them everything I knew, but it felt like a drop in the ocean. The dark web was a vast, shadowy place, and I doubted they'd find much. I was released from the hospital after a week, but I wasn't ready to go home. The thought of being alone in my apartment was too much to bear. Mark offered to let me stay with him, and I gratefully accepted. We tried to settle into a routine, but the fear and paranoia lingered, always lurking in the back of my mind. One night, as we sat in Mark's living room, the weight of everything that had happened finally hit me. I broke down, the tears I'd been holding back spilling out uncontrollably. Mark held me, letting me cry, offering words of comfort that felt hollow in the face of my trauma. "I don't know how to move on from this," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "I keep seeing his face, hearing his voice. I can't escape it." Mark sighed, his expression somber. "I don't know either, Alex, but you don't have to go through it alone. We'll figure it out together." As the days turned into weeks, I slowly started to rebuild my life. Therapy helped, though it was a long and painful process. I had nightmares almost every night, reliving the torture, the fear, the helplessness. But I was determined to keep going, to not let Dave's twisted legacy destroy me. The police investigation hit a dead end. They found plenty of evidence linking Dave to the Red Room, but tracing the network back to its source proved impossible. The dark web was too well protected, too anonymous. The realization that the people behind the Red Room were still out there, still operating, was a bitter pill to swallow. One afternoon, I received a call from the lead detective on the case. He informed me that they were closing the investigation, having exhausted all leads. I thanked him for his efforts, though it felt like a hollow victory. Justice, it seemed, was out of reach. As the months passed, I tried to reclaim some sense of normalcy. I went back to work, though I found it hard to focus. My coworkers were kind, offering support and understanding, but I could see the pity in their eyes. I hated it, but I knew they meant well. Mark and I grew closer through the ordeal. He became my rock, the person I relied on most. We talked about everything, from the mundane to the deeply personal. He never judged, never pushed me beyond what I was comfortable sharing. For that, I was grateful. One night, we were sitting on his porch, the cool breeze a welcome respite from the heat of the day. We talked about our plans, about the future. It felt good to think about something other than the past, to imagine a life beyond the shadows of the Red Room. "Do you think we'll ever really be free of this?" I asked, my voice tinged with uncertainty. Mark was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "I don't know, Alex, but I do know that we can't let it define us. We survived. That's what matters. And as long as we have each other, we'll get through it." His words gave me a sense of hope, fragile but real. I nodded, a small smile playing at my lips. "Yeah, we will." Life went on, and slowly the wounds began to heal. The physical scars faded, though the emotional ones remained. But with time, they too started to hurt less. I learned to live with the memories, to accept that they were a part of me, but not all of me. The Red Room was never far from my thoughts, but I refused to let it control my life. I took precautions, always aware of my surroundings, always cautious, but I didn't let fear dictate my actions. I couldn't, not if I wanted to move forward. And so I did, one step at a time, one day at a time. I found strength in the people around me, in the small moments of joy and normalcy. The nightmares still came, but they grew less frequent. The terror still lingered, but it was no longer overwhelming. In the end, I realized that survival was a victory in itself. I had faced the darkest parts of humanity and come out the other side. I was scarred, yes, but I was also stronger, and that strength, I knew, would carry me through whatever came next.